Candyman.
The purpose of this video is to answer the question, what is Candyman? The easy response is that he's the ghost of Daniel Robital that haunts the inhabitants of Cabrini Green.
They told my sister many times, neighborhood is haunted.
And I think that's about half right. Candyman is a sort of myth made flesh. A focus, or concentration of all the pain of one community over the decades into a single, sentient, vengeful form.
You best start believing in ghost stories, Miss Turner. You're in one.
Candyman is a very particular type of ghost, a tulpa, also known as a thought form energy ghost. It's a mouthful and it's not a common trope like a vampire or werewolf.
Hey, don't swear.
Sorry,
We're werewolves.
Not swear.
What are we?
Werewolves, not swear.
So if you'll humor me, I intend to dig deep into the esoteric history behind the supernatural hook-handed being we call Candyman.
Candyman. The Candyman can.
The root of the Candyman's myth-made flesh can be traced back to the concept of the tulpa, a Tibetan word which means emanation, and references the concept of the emanation body found in Buddhism. While you may not have heard of a thought form energy ghost before, you've probably heard of astral projection, or at least you're aware of it from modern pop culture. Astral projection finds its origins in the concept of the body's magical transformation and is thus related to the mainstream Buddhist concept of the mind-made body. Today, you can easily find books that claim to teach you how to astrally project your ass from Austria to Arkansas.
Hey, mental telepathy, astral projection, you know.
But when this idea first entered into Western culture, it did so through the filter of Western occultism, and it took on a different, sometimes grotesque form.
What is that? What is that? What is it? Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast!
Thought form was a concept first made popular by a turn-of-the-century esoteric community with an interest in the occult, known as the THEOSOPHISTS. The Theosophists were born out of the esoteric current of spiritualism, a popular religious movement at the time that claimed to be able to communicate and interact with ghosts.
Ghosts are just make-believe. It's something that your mommy tells you to keep you scared and to stay in your bed.
The spiritualists and theosophists are far too dense to get into as an aside, but if you want more background on it, check out last podcast on the left series on Madame Blavatsky, because the ripples these two movements created can still be felt to this day.
And who killed this rooster's best friend?
He's heartbroken. He says he's going to make damn sure they don't get him.
Don't miss our new episode of The Pet Psychic.
For the purpose of this video, all you really need to know is that the Theosophists took the idea of the emanation body, or tulpa, from the Buddhists and adapted it into the concept of the thought form.
Buddhism can actually be kind of weaponized.
Put simply, it's a being conjured into existence through belief in its existence.
Believe in me. Be my victim.
Annie Wood Besant and Charles Webster Leadbetter, possibly the most British name ever spoken, were two theosophists that published a book in 1901 on the subject with the creative title Thought Forms. In it, they introduced a new kind of tulpa, born out of emotions that takes a form entirely its own. Many of these early thought forms remind me of the abstract sculptures in Beetlejuice, and I doubt it's a happy accident considering the spiritualist underpinnings of that movie. The book discusses creating an evil thought form to do one's bidding.
Leave me to do my dark bidding on the internet.
What are you bidding on?
I'm bidding on a table.
But it clarifies that any bad juju the creator puts out in the world would return back to them just as well, noting that curses come home to roost. Funny how, considering both Helen and Anthony ignorantly breathed life back into an evil thought form and inevitably pay the price. These early thought forms were a far cry from, say, Candyman. Even though they shared the idea of a form conjured into existence out of the intense emotions like anger or pain, they still lacked sentience. In other words, the thought forms couldn't think for themselves.
Not that way, to the left!
But as the idea carried on in spiritualism through the first half of the 20th century, these thought forms began to evolve all on their own. Spiritualists like Alexandra David Neal breathed literal life into the thought form. She claimed that given enough psychic energy, she could create a thought form different from oneself that acted autonomously.
Give my creation! Ah!
There's an uncited story of hers where she's said to have created a fat friar tuck that traveled the world for some time before withering away from her waning belief in its existence. Other occult groups like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which I made reference to in another video on Hereditary, where I discussed the Demon King Paimon and the history of demons in general.
And a dick on the planet good enough to offset a demonology hobby.
The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which had such fun regulars as William Butler Yeats and Aleister Crowley, started to add to the mythos of the thought form. The thought form no longer needed one person to conjure it into existence. They could be formed whenever a group of persons concentrates on the same thoughts, ideas, or goals. These new thought forms were referred to as egregores, basically an old Enochian word for watcher, or guardian angel. And as the idea of the thought form carried on into the late 20th century, it shapeshifted further. As ideas of Jungian psychology entered into the conversation, thought forms gained the ability to arise spontaneously out of the collective unconscious as archetypes that take on phantom or seemingly real forms. Thought forms found their way into popular media, books, film, and television. And unsurprisingly today, there are corners of the internet where ardent believers in tulpas share tips on how to turn their half-cyborg, half-My Little Pony imaginary girlfriend into a corporeal being that they can fuck.
Bitch, are you for real?
But I'm getting off topic. The thought form of Candyman has its roots in the lynching of Daniel Robital, but he's not a ghost in the traditional sense. A ghost doesn't have to be invoked in order to affect the people around it. Apart from maybe this guy.
Nice fucking model!
And a ghost doesn't have to be believed in order to strike out or harm its victims, at least not in the traditional sense of Western horror.
You gotta do something! Why don't you just tell them you don't believe in ghosts?
The community of Cabrini Green unintentionally created the thought form of Candyman. They took the legend of one man's death and applied a pastiche of the community's tragedies to his name.
She was killed with a hook. Candyman killed her.
An entire community starts attributing the daily horrors of their lives to a mythical figure.
They borrowed from urban legends like Bloody Mary and created a rule set for his invocation. Without belief in him, he would cease to exist.
Your disbelief destroyed the faith of my congregation. Without them, I am nothing.
It was smart to position Helen Lyle as a semiotics graduate, because Candyman lies in the clash between the esoteric we've discussed and the field of semiotics that she studies. Semiotics is the study of symbols and their meaning. Two important principles of semiotics are denotation and connotation. Denotation is the most basic or literal meaning of a thing. The word rose signifies a particular kind of flower, and connotation is the cultural meaning of the word. Culturally, a rose signifies passion. Despite her odd romantic liaison with the thought form known as Candyman, and her education in semiotics, ironically Helen Lyle only sees the denotation of Candyman, a charming monster responsible for the horrors and hardships of a community. It takes until the second film to see the true connotation or cultural meaning of Candyman.
You're under arrest. Get on your knees.
And that's thanks to a new perspective. While the first film is pivoted from the outside looking in, the second film is pivoted from the inside looking out. It follows Anthony, a black artist living in the newly gentrified Cabrini Green.
How white supremacy, white people, yeah, how it creates these spaces of rampant neglect for communities of color, in particular black communities.
Yeah, like where you're from.
Yeah, Brownsville.
Southside is kind of played.
Or Cabrini Green.
Even with the community gone, he slowly discovers the lore of Candyman and inadvertently reintroduces it back into the collective unconscious. Like the history of the thought form energy ghost itself, the lore of Candyman 30 years after seems to have evolved.
Summon the Candyman.
Yeah, no. Black people don't need to be summoning shit.
We learn that Candyman isn't simply Daniel Robital. The form of Candyman has subsumed many men through the centuries.
What is he?
Candyman ain't a he. Candyman's the whole damn hive.
There are others.
Samuel Evans, run down during the white housing riots of the 50s. William Bell, lynched in the 20s. But the first one, where it all began, was in the 1890s. It's the story Helen found, the story of Daniel Robitaille.
While the first film portrays the hook-handed thought form as the reason for the community's suffering, DaCosta's film portrays him as the result. A legacy of racism made flesh, the embodiment of every hardship and horror that underpins the community of Cabrini Green. I would argue that it's this connotation of Candyman, the intense pain of Cabrini Green, that gives him his form and power. To me, the tragedy of Nia DaCosta's Candyman is that he is inevitable. You can't kill or escape something that finds its form in the suffering of a community, so long as that community suffers.
Put your hands up!
Hey shitheads, thanks for watching this video until the very end. I appreciate the time that you gave me. Time is precious. And I don't miss the irony of this video in the sense that I'm essentially doing exactly what Helen Lyle did, which is look at Candyman from the outside looking in. I just hope that I did the character and the film's justice in your eyes. If I didn't, or if I did, you could leave a comment below and let me know. If you like this video, you'll probably like other videos that I do. I tend to look at the philosophical, esoteric, and occult history behind some of the characters and movies and books and graphic novels and video games that you love. Check them out.
Check it out.